I think I mentioned earlier that institutions are not always able to provide solutions on campus just from their own divisions and manpower that they've got. One company that we've classified nationally between the 25 universities almost not as a vendor but as a partner is Microsoft, because negotiating and dealing with them is an absolute pleasure. When we sit down and we talk about pricing for software, normally we would push down the price. They're actually pulling down the price. And that makes it extremely a pleasure to negotiate with them. We've gone out in South Africa to enable students with a student laptop initiative, where the 25 universities got together and we said, let's ask for a tender for laptops and a tender for tablets as well. And in the process, we knew that we can't just provide the hardware. Software is going to be a part of that solution. So at that point in time, it was not possible for a student to buy at the same price at the university. And after, I think it was at least 24 months of negotiation, we managed to get that price for Microsoft Office down to $5 per year. Compare that to the professional version of Office, which would be incredible. So together with any laptop or hardware that the student buys, he will get this extremely reduced price, the software on the tablets, laptops. I think the Microsoft has been known for just being a software provider. I'm not sure Mark is allowed to mention it, but he's not allowed to mention it. Maybe I can mention it, Mark. Maybe not that confidential. Anything that I hear is never confidential. The fact that Microsoft no longer just is a software provider, also a hardware provider. As you know, that Microsoft has procured Nokia, and one of the solutions that will be available in South Africa worldwide is the buying solution of Microsoft Nokia, and surely it will probably compete with the Google Android devices. Hopefully we'll be in a situation that if you enroll as a student, able to select the type of device as part of your course fees. This has been experimented even at our business school this year, that if you sign up for the course together, the course fees has included a complete laptop. Together with the laptop is the software on there, and also the ebooks. So this is the direction I think most universities are moving to. But let me not market Microsoft and rather hand over to Mark. Mark is responsible for all the educational, as an educational lead in South Africa. No, sorry, Leah, and I leave him the option to market himself. Thank you very much.
Great place to have an office. Being in Africa is pretty amazing. I've lived here most of my life, and the really exciting thing about what we're doing with Mawingu is we're giving back. We're helping millions of people actually improve their quality of life and giving them an opportunity that perhaps wouldn't have had without this new technology being available to
want to go and land down in the foothills in Romans, and there's a small Maasai community down there. They've got no power and they have no internet. So this is routing to where these guys are.
It's empowering. It's something you and I take for granted. Wingo is focusing on the education, healthcare is community centers. Life changing.
To where there is power of internet and so to change our community, to change our people is the
Do you think we can release a test? It will take place this week.
Been able to provide Wi-Fi in a lot of villages all over. Yeah, we're actually deploying all throughout Africa. So rather than talking about what we were going to do, we're actually now lead some of these deployments and actually handed devices. This video will be available to you to actually see the reason the audio. But pretty amazing to basically turn on a school, devices, online services, with electricity. It's the first solar panel installations in Kenya throughout the country. And we're actually working with USAID and the Microsoft for Africa, the massive for Africa effort, the worldwide effort from Microsoft Corp, not necessarily at least in Africa. We're actually donating a lot of these devices and getting the devices in students' hands. Pretty amazing. Within, here's a student who's never seen a touch device or even device. Within, 30 minutes, they're able to swipe, scroll, and paint, and be able to get online and communicate. So we're very, very proud of this work. This work, the deployments are continuing to happen throughout Africa. This is our first showcase deployment. We learned a lot through this deployment. But in general, you're going to see a lot more activity from Microsoft coming in this space in terms of deployments with Wi-Fi, solar, electricity, and devices into the hands of students. Okay. So good morning. Oh, come on. Good morning. Okay, that's more like it. You guys just got coffee and tea, and you should be jazzed up with lots of caffeine. Lovely to be here. Anytime I get any excuse to come to Cape Town, I stop my team and say, oh, I really need to go there. So really happy to be here. My name is Mark Chaban. I've been with Microsoft for 10 years, and I have the honor to be specifically in education. Having worked for IBM and multiple companies in the past, I've never seen a single company in the world invest so much people, capacity, resources specifically in education. And my counterpart here, Claudia, the lead for South Africa, we manage a team throughout Africa and throughout Middle East and Africa that allows us actually to really focus on higher education, on K-12, work with ministries, and it's such a rewarding experience. Having done so many roles in Microsoft, it's probably been the best role for me. So I wanted to talk to you first about Africa specifically. We opened up our office in Africa in 1992 here in South Africa. We're very proud of the investment that Microsoft continues to make in Africa. So today, 22 years later, to be specific, we've got 27 offices, over 14 countries, almost 800 employees. We're not even counting interns and vendors. A massive partner ecosystem of over 10,000 partners. And we're very proud of the continued work that's happening today, specifically in these countries and in the education systems. So education in Africa specifically, what is the Microsoft goal? When we think about Africa and we think about the opportunity, it's just simply amazing, amazing. So of the 1.1 billion population, out of this population, you've got 6 out of the 10 fastest growing economies in the world in Africa. And specifically speaking, 44% of the population is below the age of 15. So we have an amazing opportunity to actually come in with the right devices, with the right services, with the right content, with the right training for both students, educators, and even policymakers. And all throughout Africa, the goal for us is very simple: digital inclusion. higher increase of graduation rates, better employment rates, increased earnings all throughout the continent. And in fact, what you'll find is if you go to Microsoft.com/education or /Africa, you'll find a lot of detail about our For Africa initiative, about incubating startups, working with a lot of VCs to actually, do a lot of development within the continent itself. So we take the education space in a very, very serious way with our people, our resources, and a lot of our efforts. Now, as similar to my colleague earlier today, I want to kind of step back for a second and look back. And it's interesting because every time I get on a plane and I travel across Middle East and Africa, 79 countries, and I'm on a plane almost every week, it feels like the instruction of 100 years ago. I'm told what to do, I'm told to sit down, I'm told when I can get up, I'm told if I can drink, if I can go to the bathroom. And it's essentially, I always feel like this is the way instruction was 100 years ago. Students were told what to do, they were instructed. And they're really, as mentioned earlier, they were really basically being prepared for the skills of yesterday, which is the factories, industries, routine, manual, not a lot of complex thinking. And if you think about some of the expressions that were used earlier, it really hasn't evolved that much, but the demands are evolving in a really, really big way. So in the past 50 years, if you look at the requirements and how education it hasn't evolved to meet some of those requirements from an economical perspective. Are we really training students today to have complex communication, expert thinking? These are the skills that are required today. And from a 21st century perspective, when you look at students, a lot of the work that's required today, when you're asking employers, hey, what are you looking for? They're looking for, is this guy a team player? Is he able to communicate? Is he a self-starter? Can he actually communicate complex situations? And are we prepping students to actually be ready to be employed? And I want to talk to you today about a lot of amazing things that are happening in the industry, and specifically some of the research that IDC's done in terms of looking at how employable are students when they graduate. Are we really giving them the basic skills for them to be employable when they graduate? But first and foremost, education today is at a tipping point, and a lot of key concepts were mentioned earlier. But as you think about anytime, anywhere learning, and you think about all of the explosive ideas around digital literacy, bring your own device, digital assessments, cloud services, flipped classrooms, it's unbelievable. We learn more from the failed deployments of, not Chromebook, but iPads, and in general, we learn so much from. hey, when you want to go offline in Africa, you can't really do much for the Chromebook. Sorry. But we learn so much. We learn so much from these deployments, and they teach us a lot around how do you really enable the offline scenarios and enable. When you give a student a device, what do they do with it? What's the content you want to give them so they can train themselves? And the same applies for a teacher. And we've had amazing success in Morocco, Nigeria, in Kenya, in South Africa around these national initiatives around the device and the service, and what do you do offline, and how do you actually enable some of these megatrends that we're seeing today in the industry. Now, let me talk a little bit about some of these megatrends as they pertain to higher education. So all of you are aware that they're related to social and mobility and cloud and big data and so on. But specifically, what we're doing in Microsoft and in Microsoft in Education is we're mapping these megatrends to specifically help higher education institutions like yourselves. So when you think about mobility, how do we enable mobile learning? How do we enable mobile educators? When you're thinking about social, Microsoft acquired a company called Yammer over 2 years ago. And Helmi mentioned earlier that we provide Office 365 today to students, and as well as Office. But we're also now actually stripped down completely the costs of Yammer from an enterprise social, and we're giving that away to students and educators as well. And what we're seeing there is amazing student engagement, e-learning platforms being built around this enterprise social platform, like a Facebook, like a controlled Facebook in my enterprise. Personalized learning, skills development, and ability, this gratification when educators like yourselves actually post documents in a controlled way, and students immediately get feedback and they hit like, and the scenarios that we're seeing now with Yammer are just absolutely amazing. So this is on the social piece. On the cloud piece, some of the largest cloud deployments that we have across Middle East and Africa are actually here in South Africa from a national cloud perspective. And a lot of work that we used to do around the private cloud infrastructures that we build out in the data centers, we're helping now higher education institutions bridge the gap to actually go out to the public cloud with our hybrid cloud strategy. So everything that you do in your data center allows you now to consume this, what we call Microsoft Azure in the public cloud or Office 365 in the public cloud and so on, in a really hybrid way. Now, this is really important for two reasons. I keep mentioning to you offline. This is very critical to everything that we do as a scenario, especially with connectivity the way it is in content. But the second reason is data sovereignty. In a lot of ways, as I met with customers here yesterday, and as I continue to travel to South Africa, everyone always tells me, well, what about data sovereignty? Where's my data stored? And you're going to be in a hybrid state for the next decade easily. So all of the deployments that you'll see from us for a scenario perspective, we would allow you to actually keep secret data local in your controlled data center. Don't actually dictate what you do in the public cloud or the private cloud. So you have this choose and pick on your own terms what you put in the public cloud and what you put in the private cloud. And this is amazing because it's allowing for IT capacity on demand, learning anywhere and everywhere, so you can put learning content in the public cloud. I'll show you some amazing examples that we've done in Australia around that, and really reduce the cost, but at the same time maintain full control over the data sovereignty elements of what you want to do here locally within South Africa. So I mentioned a lot of these today, but really CIOs within the higher education space are struggling with the bring your own device scenarios. A lot of customers that I met with yesterday said to me, hey, you know what, we've never really heard of something called Windows Info. It's basically a service that allows you to manage an Android device, an iOS device, Windows device. And it's a full-blown service in the public cloud from Microsoft. But we're expanding in this way to provide full heterogeneous support for any device or any platform that allow customers like yourself to really give the option to students to say, hey, you know what, yes, we want to provide an MBA student either an iOS device or a Windows device. But we've got a lot of learning now to share, and this is what I really want to emphasize. These reference architectures and best practices that we build around doing massive deployments in higher education institutions, whether it's in the data center or in the public cloud, all of that is available today. And if there's anything I do with my team, with Claudia, is we try to bring all of the best practices and reference architectures from our commercial business over to our education side to make sure that you're not having to go and do the R&D yourself. You're not having to start from zero. So key takeaway here is, as you think about the evolution of the cloud and the desktop and the data center, definitely please come to us and leverage us. I was in a meeting yesterday where a customer was really surprised that we've already have one of the largest national clouds built here in Johannesburg. We can share a lot of those reference architectures and best practices with you. So definitely take advantage of that. Now, let me talk a little bit about how the evolution of the user experience is changing, give you some of the future views. So what you're seeing here is actually a deployment in the US. And we call this the evolution of the UI, but this is a student who's actually using Xbox. As you can see, she's basically learning chemistry. And she's actually using the Kinect sensor within Xbox that actually has 12 different cameras built into it to manipulate everything that she wants to actually learn. So this immersive experience is basically where we're investing a lot of our efforts on from an education perspective. Today, it's unbelievable how many applications are being built outside of gaming for Xbox and Kinect that actually help specifically in education. So just a quick example of some of the different uses of immersive experiences. Now, let's talk a little bit more about what's to come down the pipe. In the next 10 years, there will be 600 million jobs created. And the shocking truth is 2/3 of those jobs that will be created and then don't even exist today. So by 2020, 2/3 of those 600 million jobs are not even created today. So are we really preparing students for being employed for the next decade? And these are the key questions that we continue to ask and we continue to invest in when you look at what Microsoft's doing in education. So this is the study I mentioned to you earlier. IDC did the study in the US. This was just done in October, so it's very, very recent. And it looked at what are the skills required for tomorrow's best jobs based on IDC research. And are we really making sure that students are set up to be employed when they graduate? An interesting part here is you look through this whole list of the top 10, from oral and written communication skills to detail-oriented to customer service-oriented, etc. The only technology that was mentioned in there was Microsoft Office. And the reason for that is because it's in a simple way. Today, anybody with a Hotmail account can open up Hotmail. You see Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote available for you in the public cloud for free. And then on the desktop side, in an offline way, we provide Office to students, actually 5 copies of Office to every single student for free to install on any device that they want in a higher education institution. I can answer a lot more details on that if you talk to me after the session. The point here is what we found is Word was the #1 used application across the world by students. And what I loved seeing today is all of the sessions that were being presented by PowerPoint. And sorry. And as we continue to evolve into being a devices and services company, we're basically investing in a big way around how do we transform education. So as the landscape continues to change, interactive whiteboards, flipped classrooms, student-developed applications, education app stores, and so on, Microsoft is changing too in a really big way. And the way we're changing is we've transformed into a devices and services company. Everything we do will center around making sure that we enable anytime, anywhere learning for all. I mentioned this to you earlier. I used to work for IBM and many different companies, but I have never seen a single company invest so much specifically in education. And specifically here on the devices that you're seeing, is we're enabling the applications, the content, the offline access on any device that you select. And you're hearing a lot about this in the news. You know, Office will be available on other platforms without any further speculation. But that capability is actually a result of the study that was done by the IDC research. A lot of the changes that we did around enterprise social and enabling those technologies just happened in the last 90 days as a result of the IDC study that I just shared with you. So I'm very, very proud to see that Microsoft's making those investments. Now, what does that Office 365 experience look like for students? In a simple way, today we provide Office 365 A2 to students for free, any student. And with that, we're actually now providing the ability for students to have the 8 different products within Office also free, as long as the university licenses the faculty and staff to have access to Office 365. So this means that a student can have usage of Office across multiple devices, 5 different devices, and they have actually the ability to do everything from Publisher to access to Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and OneNote. Now, what we've added to this is what I mentioned earlier, is Yammer. How many of you have heard of Yammer or seen Yammer? Okay, fantastic. So some of the use cases that we have for Yammer in education have been absolutely fantastic. The student engagement that we see from our enterprise socials, so think Facebook, for those of you that didn't raise their hand, think Facebook in a controlled way in a higher education institution. That's basically what Yammer is. And Yammer becomes free of charge starting April 1st. So if you're not having Yammer in your environment, then please ask us to help you. But in general, the student engagement, the team collaboration, the faculty and connected organization that we see has been absolutely fantastic. And there was discussions back and forth around how do we license Yammer, because Yammer is a very expensive commercial solution. And eventually the company said, you know what, let's just give it away for free. So I'm very excited about the continued investments that we're seeing for customers like yourselves who mentioned they are on Office 365 today. Now, I know I might be running a little bit on time. I just want to run you through an amazing example, although this is K-12, definitely touches on specifically on higher education in terms of how we deployed Azure.
The New South Wales Department of Education and Training is the largest education department in the Southern Hemisphere. We cater for approximately 3,000 million students. We have about 50,000 teachers and over 2,200 peers. We've tested literacy, numeracy and primary and secondary students for many years. When we returned to science testing, we were looking to do 2 things. We wanted to make sure that science education was on an equal footing with numeracy. We also needed to make sure that we were testing and highlighting science with our young students in early years of secondary school before they get to the point of out of this, we started development of an essential secondary science assessment, which we call the ESSA test. The ESSA test did start life as a paper test, but we always intended that it would have an online component. They wanted to replicate what students do in a laboratory in the science classroom and to test a wider range of skills and understandings, not just standard knowledge, not just very simple questions. We knew when we wanted to put this test online that we were going to face some particular challenges. In particular, we were going to administer this simultaneously to approximately 55,000 students in 650 schools across the whole of New South Wales, which is a state.
We worked out there was more than a quarter of a million for the cost. So we really need to highly scalable, well-localized. Well, we worked out that to be able to provide a fully redundant system, we need something like 50 to 60 web servers and Microsoft SQL servers in place for the actual event.
Like in the education department, we had financial constraints that we had to operate within. So it didn't seem sensible to us to invest in a lot of infrastructure to deliver a test that is run once a year over a period of that.
So looking at an alternative, Microsoft Azure offers a different way of looking at the problem and a way of being able to provide the service. Quality pure service costing on an hourly basis. So we decided how we can optimize this. We put in place 300 servers for 500 days, 100,000 that came to be around $40 an hour. Turn the servers on at 5 o'clock in the morning, so they'd all be on ready for the exam, and we turn them off at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. So instead of putting in place a $200,000 build of web server infrastructure, by going down to Microsoft Azure, the actual event on the day costs us something like $500.
It's probably one of the first really big tests of a simultaneous use across the entire system of all students at the new level having to access something online at the same moment. Feedback from students was tremendously positive. We didn't lose a single student.
Massive opportunity the way we focus
We can concentrate on building the greatest accessibility for students, and we've been very happy that Microsoft Azure.
Sorry, that was a little loud. But just to recap, this deployment was in Australia. Pretty amazing. They had a $200,000 infrastructure cost to do online exams. They basically were able to reduce that down to $500 by basically moving all of the exams online and being able to turn them on, as you saw him turn on virtual machines and basically activate the systems in the morning and then turn them off after Monday through Friday was done. So pretty amazing case study that we have in the K-12 space. Just a few more slides and I'm done, I promise. As I come to wrap up, just quickly, the TB white spaces I mentioned to you earlier, look for that here in South Africa. We're active. You're going to see a little bit more of those deployments here in your backyard. We did a quick engagement with the higher education ministry in Morocco for 8.5 million students. Pretty amazing in terms of the cost savings for the country. It's a 3-year program. We've got 3 million users today on Office 365, both educators as well as students. So a lot of great work here in terms of basically creating long life learning for students with a digital ID to be able to access content around certifications and training, regardless of where they are in terms of their age or career. And then last but not least is just this is kind of fun. I was looking at an online job posting as I was preparing for this presentation. And I really like this because they basically said, you know what, you need to be successful, you need to know strong Excel, PowerPoint, and then local skills, and exceptional influencing skills, such as the ability to use data to support an argument and influence outcomes. But this was from a Fortune 100 company and that I'm actually, excited about as well. But when I realized who is this posted by, it kind of surprised me. So you should probably learn Office if you want to work at Google. So it's just some fun. It's just a job posting I saw. I'm really proud of the work that we're doing in Africa and specifically in South Africa. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm happy to take questions.
Yeah. Thank you, Mark. I think we noticed on the skills requirements for the future, one of the second from the lowest from the bottom was time management. That's one of my soft spots as well. Not being strong in time management. But maybe we can take one more question. There's one at the back there.
Morning.
Morning.
I admire what Microsoft is doing in Africa, and I wouldn't want to point towards Microsoft to be the savior of education in Africa. But if we look at the disconnect between what we see here and one of the skills, the skill right at the top for the future you have as oral and written communication skills. And if you look at the dismal results and I'm not speaking for the rest of Africa, I'm speaking for South Africa, of our annual national assessment for grades 3, 7 and 9. We are just above Yemen, and that's it. So are we not having pockets of excellence? And for the rest of the learners and they are the workforce future, what hope is there? And we're sitting in a hope conference. What hope is there for them? Because if I speak to teachers, they feel demoralized. If I speak to learners, they don't even know what's going on around them. So I'm not asking Microsoft to answer the question, but essentially to keep that question in mind when we see all the beautiful graphics and what is happening, that there is chaos in education.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for that question. I think you're not posing it at Microsoft. Maybe Claudia, you would like to respond because Claudia is really responsible for education, and maybe if I can challenge you on that, Claudia.
Absolutely. You're quite right. You're spot on what you're saying. I mean, in this country, we've got almost 12 million K-12 scholars. 93% of those are in the public schooling system. And if you look at our schools, 25,000 of them, more than 60% of them, which you probably don't realize, are what we call multi-grade schools. So one teacher, a single teacher in a classroom has to teach different standards, different grades in the same classroom. It's incredibly difficult. What we're doing from our side is we have a program called Partners in Learning. Angela's not here today, but Helmi's met her, she leads it. And it's really about us developing teachers, helping teachers with technology to improve teaching, and through improving teaching, improving learning. We are working across a number of the provinces. We're doing quite a lot in the Western Cape. I'm hoping that we're going to start doing a lot more in the Free State. We're doing stuff in Gauteng. But it's a big challenge. I think the good news is that certainly the Department of Basic Education, from the Honourable Minister downwards, there's a recognition that, as you say, that the annual national assessment results are very poor, and that technology is a vehicle, irrespective of who that technology comes from. Technology is a vehicle that can improve education. So right now, we saw the TV White Spaces video, and Brett talked about it as well. I don't know if there's anybody from University of Limpopo here today, but today we've got 7 rural schools which are using TV white spaces from the University of Limpopo, so the transmitters are actually on the university campus. And those small schools, the teachers have been trained, and each class, one class in each of those schools is getting tablets, and we're going to do measurements, see whether the annual national assessment results change as a result of technology in those schools. So, in summary, that's where we are, but it is a big challenge we have in this country.
Thank you very much for that, and I think we conclude this session. Mark, thank you very much. We appreciate you. And maybe just tying on to the Claudia's remarks about the schools, we've got Duncan Reeves making a presentation later today, very much focused on schools as well, and I think very clearly the challenges in terms of schools, not one company. about the fact that we had it once that our next speaker is Matthew. Now Matthew is coordinator for the Listen, Live and Learn initiative. Obviously, that's a tongue twister, and I would rather ask Matthew to go into detail.
Thanks, Helmi. Good afternoon. I've been asked to present on social media. I'm going to be following a bit of a case study approach today with regards to our own sort of looking at Triple L and the Triple L initiative. You'll notice I call it Triple L because you can also only say listen, live and learn so many times before you sort of run out of that ability. So we're going to be looking at harnessing social media with regards to teaching and learning, in my case in the out-of-class learning environment, and also looking at the intergenerational friction that occurs in a university, specifically when you look at system design and social media. So in terms of session overview, as I said, we're going to look at the case study, our attempts, things to consider about Generation Y, look at the lessons that we learned, look at the move from a site to a platform, the word that has been thrown around a lot, why we didn't choose any of the vendors for our platform, and an overview of our preliminary results of specifically some of our access studies. Okay, so in terms of the case study, Listen, Live and Learn, the initiative that that I run, I'm going to say we a lot because I've now got a team. At this stage, it was just me. But so it's an out-of-class learning experience for students. It's a residential program. It's sort of our flagship program within residential life at Stellenbosch University. And the idea is that students enroll for a year in this program. They live with a bunch of students that they don't know in a small house. And the idea is that they really get to know the other as such. And part of this and part of the learning requires them to reflect. And before I got involved, this was done through these large amounts of reports that nobody ever did or handed in, but were formal requirements. So they were there. As I said, nobody ever handed them in. And when they did, they would come to a filing cabinet in the Triple L office, and I would apparently read them, and this would sort of enlighten the world. And those who did submit it, they were terrible, and I had to read them. So I said I didn't really want to do this, and we needed to change. And so the idea was, introduce a blog, right? It's the sort of snake oil of how to sort of approach sort of social media and students. Like, implement a blog, and they will come. They will approach this with sort of a glazed look of happiness in their eyes. And of course, there was a blog, and nobody knew the passwords, and it was terrible, and it was ugly, and it was built outside of the university system and by some student who sort of had left. And sort of, welcome, please run this project. And this, please by no means consider any of this an indictment of IT. Really, I get along very well with them. But there was existing blog infrastructure, so I went over to IT and said, can I have a blog? And they said, yeah, sure, we'll sign you up for it. It's in a blogspot at sun.ac.za/user/etc. Run your project blog off that. Sort of fill up a tweet with just the reference. And then there were all the institutional tensions that you accomplish. So first is usage policies, right? This includes things like you're not allowed to backlink sort of Twitter and stuff. Like, please, can I have a Twitter feed on this page? No, sir, that's going to require a hole in the firewall, and that will destabilize everything, and we're all going to die, so no. And then, you're going to give students what? Unmoderated access to a blog site on the university with the university's name. They're going to write stuff about this experience that they're living in a house with a whole bunch of random people. Like, this is Big Brother, but like now you're putting the cameras on. We don't want that. That's like, we're really worried about the risk. So like, you can then moderate every single comment, every line. You have to. And you're just one person, and you're trying to set up a blog site because you've got this tiny project that you want to take global. And this is where you sort of get stuck. So you're like, okay, well, let's have a look. So this, by the way, is the updated version of the university blog site. Before when I was really doing this sort of look into the platforms, the blog site was monochrome in terms of coloring. Like now there's a gradient in the maroon. Before there was no gradient in the maroon, and it was cream. So the page had been there so long it started changing color. And basically, this is what I call the Admin A effect. Admin A, for those of you who do not come from Stellenbosch University, is our general administration building. And we only get students there at the beginning of the year because they have to go there to get their student card. Otherwise, they avoid it like the plague, and rightfully so. So, this is the blog site. So, please, run this program where students want to share their life, their things that make them happy, that make them laugh, cry, change their lives on this. And so it's like, no, I can't do this. I can't look at this the whole time. So we're going to change this. We're going to come up with our own thing that differentiates ourselves a lot. And we're going to add social media, because if you add a Twitter button, everything will be fixed. Like, just, Deirdre, you don't get to sort of nod in approval. You spam everyone. So we did that. Well, when I say we, so I created this page. And also the other thing is, when you're looking to deploy a site, ask somebody to look over it who does not use things like WYSIWYG and GUI as part of their general language. Because if they do, they will accept really, really complex ways of uploading data, tweaking things, quickly going into the HTML coding because somehow your text has gone skew. And they will come out saying this is awesome, when anybody else who doesn't like the term WYSIWYG will not. So I created this. I added social media buttons there, and nobody came to the site. Like, it was dead. I used every bit of social capital. Now, bear in mind, this program at this stage has less than 100 students in it, and so I know all of them personally, and I'm seeing them on a regular basis, and I'm begging to please blog. Share your experience. The internet wants to know what you are doing in your house. Your identity crises, you're really sort of grappling with who you are as a person and sort of how this experience is changing your life. The world needs to know, because I need a job, so please blog. And they didn't. And occasionally I could sort of get somebody to sort of post something, and a few people, sort of like 20 or 30 people, might read it, and I think it was me just refreshing the page. And what was interesting is this had full social media support. So not only could they sort of press any number of buttons to share it on all number of pages, but they could add pictures, they could add videos. In literally any known video sharing site, you could load it onto here. Not one video was loaded. 2 pictures in an entire year of the site were actually uploaded. Even though there was a nice share button for share picture, nothing. So we went and looked at this, and we said, why is there this disconnect between this system, which is obviously doesn't have the Admin A effect quite as badly as the previous version? How can we integrate this with students? Because surely with social media, like, students are online constantly. Like, why aren't they blogging on my site? What prevents them from engaging in this obviously amazing platform? And so we so I did a bit of looking into Generation Y. And this is where it becomes crucial. And if you have ever said, why aren't they reading the sign? You need to focus on this part. Image bombardment. Some studies that look at how many images people see on a daily basis in the sort of general commute and walking around life is anywhere up of 3,500 targeted ads per day. That's a vast amount of images, and those eye contact studies show that more than 99% of those images are filtered. Like, the person is literally not aware that they've even seen it. And yet, those images by companies like Google and Microsoft and everyone else are unbelievably researched and targeted and aggressive and use psychologists in determining how we do it, and yet we are still able to filter out 99%. And I say we this time because I'm part of Generation Y. And yet we are surprised when we print out a little A4 in Comic Sans and stick it up next to the counter that they aren't able to see it, but they can sort of filter out Google. And so what you see is a very nuanced subconscious processing of imagery. And it is subconscious because literally in most cases they don't even know they're doing it. And what you see is the same sort of thing that we saw early in the century when we started looking at how chess masters were able to recognize plays so quickly, is they're using the facial recognition part of their brain to actually process day-to-day images. So if you search font characters on YouTube, you'll see this. There are thousands of videos dedicated to creating personalities around fonts. And when I say fonts, I'm talking Times New Roman over there, the suit. You've got Courier New, you've got Joker, Wide Latin eating a burger, Century Gothic, Old English, basketball. And I mean, you can dismiss this as being completely and utterly irrelevant and silly. And you do so at your own peril. Because all of those fonts mean things. And if you are doing serious high-level basic visual processing, and you are able to assign a personality to a font, it changes how you are going to interpret the message when you actually read it. So looking at that, and looking at the fact, and so I was just looking at these, and you know, you've got all of these logos, and I was doing this with a group of students, and somebody said there's something really wrong with the Flora logo. It's because Flora in this country is not Flora in America, it's Bessel. But she couldn't understand why Flora wasn't Flora, and it's literally within a second she had identified that, even though we changed the name. And that's the degree of which this processing is happening. You look at Facebook, looks slightly different from the sort of average platform that I've shown so far. And notice that literally every single post has an image next to it. First an image, then the text. You look at Twitter, who should you follow? Not a list of names, a list of pictures with their details. If you've got an image, it's displayed automatically. It's not first click a link, then get the image. So we looked at that, and we're like, okay. And Google Hangouts and some of the other platforms weren't available yet, and SharePoint wasn't really all that happy, and Adobe cost too much. So we looked around, and we said, okay, we don't want to be moderators. We want to be cherry pickers of information, because that's how we are going to advance. We want to promote messages through social media. We don't want to just be focused on sort of limiting what they may or may not sort of put online. But that means that we need to give ownership to the students. The terrible word for like anybody who's involved with blog at the university and writing the usage protocols, do not give ownership. That's like lesson number one that they'll tell you. Because we believe that these students, if we are really going to make use of social media, is they need to be able to add value, and they're not going to add value if they don't take ownership of the information. The second thing is we need to allow control. They can control almost every aspect apart from the real privacy settings of their Facebook page. So you should allow them to have ownership of the content that they are generating. And this is the important thing. Social media is the private domain, public as well, but private domain of those students. It's theirs. It's their sitting room, it is their hangout space, it is their lives. It is not your classroom. So if you want them to engage in terms of social media in your classroom, you need to play by their rules. You need to make it attractive, and they need to want to have your content in their house, in their room, in their space. And it's not going to be in brown velour upholstery. It's going to need to look like something that they would like to have in their sitting room. Except hipsters have brought back velour. So, okay. So you need to make sure it's differentiated from Admin A. And seriously so. And we use multifunctional use. So we looked at creating personas. Like instead of Matthew posting, you know, what new blog functionality had been figured out at 2 o'clock in the morning, I created a character. And you write a little backstory, and it's ridiculously lame, but people appreciate it, it makes them laugh, and they'll actually follow. So we created Test Bunny and Opportunity Booklet. We introduced social discussion forums for targeted stuff. We didn't just leave them up there. If we needed it, we used it. If we didn't, we took it off, because otherwise it just sort of sits there and stagnates. And if something stagnates online, it's very hard to revive it. Ask Google Buzz. So we introduced something called Easy Blog. It is a paid platform, but it costs, I think, 1,600 for a full license at this stage, and with full support, etc. And so we decided to sort of give this a little whiz. So that was the new look, which is slightly different, very different from the sort of the standard Admin A look. And immediately, students started adding images. What was important in terms of the platform is each of the students had their own blog on this platform. It was actually a platform. It was theirs, and so they could give it their name, they could change the give themselves a biography, because this is, after all, what we want to do. We want to give them agency. We want to teach them to really inhabit this sort of platform and the sort of internet as a whole, and not just sort of be passive consumers. So allow them to do so. And so they get to post stories, they get to post things, and we start seeing more and more sort of interactive time. What we also see is that the hits started rolling out. Now, bear in mind that at this stage, again, the program is less than 100 students strong. In Stellenbosch, South Africa, it's not, we have a tiny budget, we are not globally marketing this, and suddenly somebody writes something about a name Boyson, and they get 1,084 hits. That happened within 24 hours. It's not a news site, it's a subdomain of a university domain, and we're getting that sort of hit, which I know on the Microsoft scale is minimal, but we were quite happy with that. And then we looked at, in terms of the integration into their space, what did we do? So first of all, if you can subscribe, and you can subscribe to individuals, or to a whole blog, or to a category. It's up to the user to decide what they want to be part of, and you deliver it into their space in terms of their subscription. We did something, and this is where IT came in, and this is where Mark Allen Johnson and Johan Loepscher were incredibly helpful, is they allowed it to backpost from Twitter. So if any of the students who logged onto the thing and clicked that option, if they tweet something and end it with #blogit, it pops up on their blog and records it. So suddenly what we saw is students who wanted to keep memories of things that they were activities they were involved in, were starting to include or use the blog as their sort of journal of their Twitter activity that they thought was relevant. They started taking pictures of where they were in the world and sort of sharing it. I mean, again, not something that I suggested they should do. So one of the houses decided they were all overseas for the June holidays and started taking my program with them to the Arc de Triomphe. It formats it automatically and allows them to auto-post onto Facebook and onto ours, the ones that we cherry-pick. It auto-formats things for Twitter and allows, as I said, back-posting and to-posting to Twitter, and allows us to really highlight one or two students' sort of really good stuff rather than sort of moderating the stuff that we're worried about. Visitor results from April to November, 8,503 visits with an average view of 6 minutes, which means that people are actually reading what students are writing. 37% or 39% people came, read what they needed to, and left, which is fine. 5 actions per visit, those were the number of total page views, and from 60 countries for a program with less than 100 people in it. And what's interesting is that 8 o'clock in the morning is one of the lowest times in terms of activity. But just before lunch, when people are drifting off in your classroom, that's when they suddenly start engaging in the platform. And this is for those people who are worried about content and worried that students are going to do things that are stupid online. We know that blogging is low. Our participation was good, but it didn't even meet our guidelines. So we proceeded in reflective feedback and asked what impedes you, apart from time, because that's obviously like, I don't have the time to do this, Matthew. And we got a 97% response rate. Permanence, voice, so who actually wants to hear from me, and the ability to write are the 3 areas that people say would prevent me from engaging in something like this. This is somebody who says, mainly I'm utterly aware that everything on the internet is written in indelible ink, and the notion of being able to express yourself freely without consequences is a bit idealistic. By the way, this is also somebody who said that they do not consider myself a good writer at all. I've been in front of my computer many times ready to start working on a possible blog entry, but I have no idea what to write about. That, followed by that. So, if you're looking at anything, and this is with regards to social media and your program design, you need to look at the image. If you miss it on this, your social media is going to literally sink, like Google Buzz. You disappointed me. I had so many hopes and dreams for that. Ownership is important. If you want people to engage in their content in their social media space, you need to give them the ownership of the content that they are sharing. And then the actual content is important, because if you're just spamming them with useless stuff, they're going to unfollow you. In terms of the teaching and learning area, it doesn't just happen. If you think that you're going to engage students in your classroom by adding a Twitter hashtag to the front of your presentation like I did, you're going to be severely disappointed and think people don't like you. Know the lingo, please. Like, you wouldn't get up in front of a lecture and start out by incorrectly explaining first year economics, because they're not going to listen to the rest of your economics lecture if you get the basic stuff wrong. And it's exactly the same. If you aren't using the correct lingo, they don't have to believe anything else you say, and that will spill over and do your actual message in terms of your classroom serious damage. And if you do that, you will achieve success. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. I think we all agree that the platform that you created enabled the student to voice their voices. I was a bit concerned when you gave admin A a certain definition and you included IT in that. Luckily, in the end, you twisted the story to at least add a positive effect of IT contribution. So thank you very much. Any questions from the audience? I think the fact that you enabled the students to start voicing their concerns as well, I think this is what we're all looking for, is better interactivity from the students. So thank you very much for that. There's a question.
Sorry, it's a full-time residential program. So at the stage where we started this, that's literally the amount of beds I had to fill. So that limited it. And that's where social contact theory comes in, and why we felt the online platform was so important, is because it's able to spread that message and the ability and the discussion to sort of ripple out more than the sort of immediate sort of friendship circle and family circle, which we know is already happening with the students involved. This year we've increased by 120%. The construction is now complete of those additional 120 beds. So we are growing, but if we are able, with this limited number who were really participating, to get the sort of views that we did, and the sort of and for the duration that they did, means that message is spreading far further than the 100 students, in which case we are starting to have more of effect, something that you would not have without social media. And it's not something that I can drive. The only way that people are going to start reading those messages if they pops up in their friends' Twitter feed, if their friends' Facebook feed, and that's where social contact theory comes in.
Okay, thank you. Any more questions? Okay, thank you, Matthew, very much appreciated. And as you, again, we thank you for your efforts to the standard token. Thank you very much. Our next presentation is on mobility technology in the local classroom. We've got two presenters there, JP Bosman and Sonia Stradum. These two are very well known on the Stellenbosch campus. They have been involved in the enrichment of the classroom content, and we look forward to your this. Thank you.
Still morning. Good morning to everybody. Nice to be here to be speaking to you and I guess the world. I don't know who's watching on YouTube. I think we've seen 1 or 2 viewers at least. We want to share with you today, it was mentioned that today is mostly about the technologies, which is true, but I think Matthew and our presentation goes a bit to the learning and teaching side, the pedagogical side. So I guess that's who I am, and our center that we work for, Center for Learning Technologies, that we stand for, the interface between the learning and teaching pedagogy and the information technologies. So, but we wanted to share this short bit of research. It's in a sense a bit of a pilot study, and you'll see now the numbers are limited, but I think very interesting of the things that we found. So me and Sonia would like to present this mobile technologies for learning, Stellenbosch University first year's perspective. Very important to note it's first year, and it is also its last year's, some first year students. Oh, I must use the... So what is the local context in terms of our presentation of our little study? Well, first of all, we have to look local, and at Stellenbosch University, a lot has happened last year or 2. And 2 important things has happened around strategic plans that were made. The first is the ICT for Learning and Teaching strategy, which was devised in last year, and is giving us some vision moving forward. And it incorporates things like placing devices in the lecturer and the student's hands. Those are the kind of words that's used in that strategy. And a lot of other things around connectivity and bringing your own device, and also things around the pedagogy, etc. So that's the first sort of layer of our context, of the local context. We also have a new draft teaching and learning strategy, which has a strong focus on graduate attributes. And some of those attributes are actually focused also on digital literacies and being able to use, both from a student side as well as a lecturer side, ICTs, information communication technologies. So from a local context, this is sort of the background that our students come into, and also what we've done the study, context in which we've done the study. If we look at the global trends, many of you probably know the Horizon report, which is an excellent example of looking at higher education specific technologies that go through that dip, the trough of disillusionment. That's all I can remember. And then it goes to the plateau of productivity, etc. And we also looked at that. So from our literature reviews, this was very interesting. Remember, we're looking at the devices, at mobile technologies, specifically for learning. This is some of the things that we found in the current literature. The first thing is, there definitely is an expectation from student side, and there is a huge potential in using mobile technologies for learning in higher education. The second one is that there is an expectation that the infrastructure at the institution will be as such that I can bring my own device. So the BYOD is expected. Furthermore, it seems the literature tells us that one has to make a distinction between students' personal use of technologies, so the personal, the popular, the informal on the one hand, and on the other hand, the more formal, the more educational, institutional. So there is that divide, as it were. The other interesting thing is that there's a dichotomy, not really a dichotomy, but one shouldn't forget that the more traditional type of technologies, and here I include things like computers, PCs, and laptops specifically, are still very much in vogue, very much trusted as technology. But there's also the emerging technologies that are there. So it's not the one instead of the other. Both are still active. And then we always in fear and trepidation to put that digital natives on there. At a previous conference where we did this presentation, somebody went on for about 10 minutes just because we used that word. So we must just tell you what we mean by that. I don't really subscribe to, or we don't really subscribe to the notion that they are digital natives as such. But an interesting perspective from the literature is to say that, okay, sure, you don't get a person like that, but if you take the context, then it may be true that people are actually born into a, let's call it a digital homeland or motherland. So they can't necessarily yet speak the language and know the rules and of the culture, etc. but those are some things to be learned. So the whole idea of the digital being in a specific context is still relevant. And then an interesting thing that we'll build on our conclusion is that past experiences, specifically school and home and all other learning ecologies, and this includes very specifically high schools, really play a very, very strong role, important part in how students or learners and users perceive technologies for learning. So we had 4 research questions that we wanted to focus on. Firstly, what are the different devices and applications that the first year students use for learning? What do they have? What are they using? Secondly, what are the levels of the first year students' proficiencies in the use of these mobile technologies in learning? Thirdly, what are the learning practices that students employ with the use of mobile devices and applications? Now, please note that this is actually what we were asking ourselves. It's very easy, and we've done many surveys at Stellenbosch University to ask students, what do you have? Do you have a cell phone, a laptop, etc., etc.? So it's easy to get those quantitative findings, but we don't actually yet know what they do with it. And this is the thing that tickles me, that tickles us. What are the practices that they have that they employ for studying in higher education? And the last thing, what are student expectations regarding the role of the institution? So what should the university provide? The faculty through lecturers and departments. Yes, and I said lecturers in terms of the in-class as well as the out-of-class learning that Matthew has now set up. So that was the scene that we set for this bit of research. So the methodology, we used a mixed method approach. We started with an online questionnaire, and we focused on the alma mater's cluster, which is a clustering of both private and residence students. Got 78 responses after a lot of begging and pleading and SMSing. It's really difficult to get people to answer this, but we got 78 good responses. And then after that, we followed this up. So we studied our quantitative findings, then we followed it up with a more qualitative study, which is actually the biggest part of research. We found the most interesting thing. There we had 7 participants, 5 of them females and 2 males. And then we used the IPA method, interpretative. I had to practice this many times. Interpretative phenomenological. There you go. Right, so in terms of the interviewee demographics, so those are the 7. We can see that the majority of the interviewees were in the university residence, only 1 in the PSO, which is the private residence, actually. Faculties, only 3 of them, or 3 of them. Luckily, 3 of the biggest faculties were represented there: arts, economic management sciences, and engineering. And bar 2 students, the majority attended Model C schools. Cell phones, all of them smartphones. And then very interesting is that only 1, you can see there, of the 7 participants had a tablet. This was quite surprising because one expects the picture to be very different. Right, so moving back now to the quantitative findings, that was the online questionnaire. Those were the 78 participants. Of them, 91% had smartphones, so a very high percentage of first years have these smartphones. Surprisingly few students have a tablet of their own. And then we tried and we coded some of the responses around how these technologies were used, and we saw that the mobile technologies were mostly used for communication and collaboration. It was used somewhat for discovery of knowledge. That is, going out finding knowledge on your own, not just regurgitating, have it force-fed. And there was very little for the creation of knowledge. And I think the creation of knowledge is what Matthew was showing us. What is that learning task that the student comes out of him or herself and creates, says something, and in the process of saying, of engaging with thoughts and putting it out there, creating knowledge, how much is that is happening? From this survey and these students, it isn't happening a lot. We asked them about apps, and a fair amount of apps were used, and then we asked them, how do you actually use these devices for your learning at university? And that was very scarcely populated, those things. There were a few responses, but they were more on I use this app, I use that app. And so there weren't sort of reflective type of responses where they could say, I use my mobile phone for this kind of communication, then I use my laptop for that kind of, etc. And I think this is where Sonia needs to take us through the qualitative part.
Thank you, Jacob, for that. In terms of the qualitative findings, three main themes emerged, namely digital literacies, technology-enhanced learning, and then lastly also the student voice. And these main themes were then supported by a number of sub-themes, as you can see on the table. Perhaps important for us in terms of the data, and I think JP mentioned that as well, was that from a socio-cultural perspective, first-year perceptions regarding the uses of mobile technologies cannot be viewed in isolation from their previous learning experiences before university and their developed sense of learning strategies, and lastly also their perception regarding the value of these technologies. The data indicated that in our case, that the majority of our interviewees come from a school context with no or very basic exposure to the use of technology in the classroom. As no surprise to many of our South African colleagues, you'll see that all schools prohibited the use of mobile and cell phones in the schools, and specifically in the classroom, due to fears of abuse. One of our interviewees actually came from a private school, and she enjoyed a much more integrated curriculum in terms of technology, but even in their case, the school prohibited the use of mobile phones as well. In terms of our first main theme, the two sub-themes that emerged there is the level of competency and also the personal value placed on technology in learning. And what we observed during the interviews was that these contrasting competency levels from the different interviewees. For example, some of our participants indicated that they know very little about the use of technology, and they prefer the traditional mode of delivery, and equally still prefer making notes and using paper and pen. Interesting enough, there was a level of awareness of the possible tools and possibilities, but we observed a lack of enthusiasm and motivation to actually further explore and investigate these notions further. There were actually some students that also showed some transitional attributes and also highlighted the possibilities and the value of these technologies. Sub-themes emerging from our second main theme, the technology-enhanced learning, include the underlying motivation for specific device selection, and also the in and outside of the classroom learning practices specifically. Choice of mobile devices was mainly derived from practical considerations. So from our participants mentioned the fact that they preferred a wide screen, size of the screen was important, and equally very important to them is being able to comfortably make notes during lessons. So that's some of the comments in terms of tablets that they mentioned as well. As JP has mentioned, very clear for us was that in this particular sample, the majority of our students still preferred laptop as their device choice, and mainly they used this laptop as a desktop PC. The inside and outside classroom learning experience varied in depth and breadth. In terms of the out-class experience, in terms of mobile users, students tended to use different applications. For example, using social media to set up study groups, and equally, there's one example of a student that uses mobile phone to actually take pictures of maths solutions and sharing that online. Inside the classroom was slightly different. It seems as if students are much more reliant on lecturers for creating these learning opportunities, What they did mention, however, was the fact that they highlighted the value of podcasting, in particular, specifically for revision purposes and equally also to help with more complex concepts. Our third main theme, student voice. Our last main theme, very important and an interesting year was that in terms of student needs, it was clear that participants valued an authentic learning experience. So any form of technology training or support that they receive from the institutional side or faculty side, they wanted to be directly linked to their current field of study as well. Reference was made to the valuable role of faculty and lecturers specifically facilitating these learning experiences. And as JP has mentioned in the literature as well, students expect the institution to obviously support them in terms of infrastructure to be able to use these mobile devices effectively. To conclude, in terms of this particular study, when we refer to possible institutional device initiatives, it was clear for us that the choice of mobile devices in this particular study is mainly motivated by personal preference, and therefore we confirm and support the Bring Your Own Device initiatives from the institutional side. We would like to argue for a multifaceted responsibility in terms of embedding the sensible use of mobile technologies for first-year students specifically. We believe, firstly, that the institution has a responsibility in terms of the infrastructure and guidance. Equally, that faculty and lecturers have a responsibility in terms of implementing strategy, providing these learning opportunities, and very importantly, to also provide support and guidance, in particular for first-year students. But thirdly, we also argue and believe strongly that students themselves have responsibility, and that we would like to encourage all relevant role players to motivate first-year students to embark on the journey of lifelong and life-wide learning, and hopefully that would also contribute to the development of graduate attributes, which is also really important to us at the university. Lastly, from a local classroom perspective, it is clear that the local experience provides a strong drive for in terms of mobile devices for learning. And the question can rightly be asked whether the sample that we had, are they representing of so-called net generation? Rather, are these students displaying transitional attributes that will pave the way for future embedded mobile learning practices? Thank you for your time.
Thank you, JP and Sonia, for sharing the outcome of your research with us. I think it's really insightful. Any closing remarks you want to make, JP?
Well, you've seen there on the slide, it says further research. So we really would like to broaden the sample and also include the senior students. But of course, for example, in the ICT strategy, we had focus group interviews, and we had a group of students there who would probably, say almost the opposite of what we've shown here. So I think the moment a student goes to second, third year, things change. So a lot happens in the first year. That transitional, I think, is quite important. So this is valuable, definitely from the perspective of how do we treat the students who come from our high school basically system in first year, and then we'll need to see now how does it actually change if we take second, third years, etc. So we are, I guess, now more than ever committed to looking at the senior students as well, and ask them the same questions in the same in-depth way. To me, this study was very, very eye-opening. You would think seven people are few, but it takes a long time and it's very in-depth with the IPA method. Actually see and tease out what the students are actually saying. So it's very valuable, I think, to have these dip-ins and to get the qualitative data as well. But we have to do it with senior students.
Thank you, JP. I think we've got time for a few questions. Any questions? Back there.
Hi, I'm Hadi Fakir from Stellenbosch University. In the new quantitative findings, show that although minimal, that knowledge discovery, the use of mobile technologies for knowledge discovery and knowledge creation was minimal. But can you give one or two examples?
In terms of the discovery of knowledge, it was really mainly internet searches that came up there. There wasn't really some innovative practices to share with you. Very much basic. And in terms of the creation of knowledge, once again, a few students actually used blogs, but as JP has mentioned, there very few of them. So those are some of the examples.
Thank you. Any more questions?
Hello, it's Claudia from Microsoft again. So, were the students not using the devices for e-textbooks in your experience?
The 7 students we talked with had different opinions on that. Most of them, I'd say, preferred, having actually reading on a laptop, and preferred the books. But it's actually quite interesting because there's this tension in the students themselves. Because in one part of the interview, they would say, it's so great that I can have my laptop or my cell phone when I go to class and have everything with me. But at the same time, they talk about the more traditional ways of having a textbook, getting the notes in class, and they mentioned a lot about the ease of use of actually making notes in class. So some of them, one or two, said, no, it's fine, they understand. Those who want to do it, great. They have the tablets soft, you can't hear them. But please don't interfere. So it's very interesting, the class dynamic that came out that we got to know. In big engineering classes, the one student would say, oh, it's great, we can just use the stuff. And the other student said, no, I want to listen, really concentrate. So don't want the students around me to even use technologies. So that's what I'm saying. It's not very clear cut. So what came out very strongly is podcasts are valued highly, and on ebooks and that, they're actually not there. Nobody said, give it to us now in this sample. But we know from other experiences and other bit of research and projects that there are others that do start asking for. But good question.
Yeah. Maybe to tie onto that question, I think the whole challenge in terms of digital rights management, on top of that, the tablets, and maybe Naspers can tell us more about what they're doing on that. But yes, as an institution, obviously open education resources on tablets and class notes is important. But textbooks is a different challenge. How do you procure those textbooks? Do you leave it to the students to procure, and the digital right management, who's responsible for that? Either the publishers or those who protect the intellectual property of those textbooks. This is something I think we all still need to learn to see what those business models pan out to be in the future. Any more questions? Oh, you're good.
Thank you. I'm Danny Brink from Agriculture here in Stellenbosch. Drawing conclusions from earlier presentations such as Sweden, like they're addressing a much narrower band of social, cultural, economic, call it one background of their students. We're confronting here in Africa, in South Africa, and now at our institution, very wide band background. Social issues, IT, access, competencies, and so on. And sometimes I feel a little lost. Go after this, keep behind very important cluster of what you're supposed to achieve. And maintain that you fall behind in terms of where competitors are going. I think it's a particular challenge, maybe us, one of the panelists, stuck in the middle and being out anywhere. I think it's a very distinctive challenge in Africa and reflected at our university.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for that question. I think we can definitely include that in one of the panel discussions. And I think there are some of the other university leaders as well that Ian mentioned that as well. So thank you very much for this panel discussion. Okay, I think that if there are no more questions, we can say thank you very much to JP and Sonia. And again, you've got to be part of the traditions. I think you would agree that the spread of presentations that we're having this morning is quite great. I think thank you very much for the last two speakers that gave it a bit of a different angle. And now I think the last session before lunch, there's one name that everybody knows in South Africa, especially from an IT director's point of view. That's Duncan Greaves. Duncan is the enabler for connectivity between universities. And you will find that he's probably a bit grayer than he was a number of years back. And because of the demand for connectivity. And I think if we were to look at what was the most successful project between universities, Duncan, I think you would probably agree, compliments for you, your contribution there, is the connectivity between the universities. And I've mentioned previously that this is running at 10 gigabits per second, and this is being expanded to the schools environment, and Duncan will emphasize that as well. So Duncan, thank you also for all the promises you're going to make, and we look forward to enabling us further into the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Helmi. I'm probably going to disappoint you in many of the expectations that you've just created. But thank you to you and to Antoinette for the invitation. Always a pleasure to be associated with any initiative that you have launched. And if I can add any value to the proceedings today, that will be my privilege. Let me get to technology first of all. Okay, working fine. I work for Tenet. If you don't know the name, then I'm delighted, because good services are invisible. But in fact, I'm not going to talk about Tenet today. I'll try and leave some space in the question time, if there are questions about what we're doing. I'm not going to talk about, for example, our TV whitespace engagement. We're doing work with both Microsoft and Google and other partners today. I'm talking about the backhaul connectivity within Africa. I work for Tenet, but I'm also a non-executive director of the Ubuntu Alliance, and mostly about the southern and eastern parts of Africa. I'm going to talk because that's what I know best. So, as a prefatory remark, this is a caution. Use the term Africa readily and easily, but in fact it is an enormously complicated continent, and it's much bigger than people think it is. That famous graphic is packed into the geographical area of Africa is the United States, much of Western Europe, India, and all of China and Great Britain fitting into Madagascar. It's very large. Culturally, politically, historically, economically, anthropologically, it's very diverse. And anyone who generalizes about Africa does so at his or her peril. Having said that, I'm going to generalize. And let's start by a general remark about communications technology in Africa. It has historically been poor. More broadly speaking, Africa has faced extreme development challenges in the last century. And as both a consequence of those challenges and a contributor to them, we've had very poor communications technology infrastructure, aggravated very often by phenomena such as enduring monopoly incumbencies and quite weak regulatory regimes. Connectivity throughout much of Africa for a very long time has been dominated by VSAT, satellite technology. Stellenbosch, I believe, has been a notable player in this sphere for many years. So a contributor to that part of our history. Good technology, and still remains technology of choice for reaching difficult to reach places, but mostly it's expensive. It's not well suited to anything interactive because the latency is very high. It's generally sold in highly asymmetrical configurations because the uplink proportion is expensive, and has generally been a severe disabler of connectivity in Africa, despite its ubiquity. Fortunately, we've had a lot of alternatives coming our way. You probably can't see the detail on this screen, but around the periphery, lots of submarine fiber optic cable. For interest, I have some samples of what submarine fiber optic cables look like. People often say, well, what do these cables actually look like? Well, now, arm rings if anyone wants to have a look at them later. So you probably can't see the detail on that, but there is Steve Song's famous map from his wonderful blog, manypossibilities.net. These are the submarine cables in use now around Africa, and you can see 3 of them come into South Africa, 2 on the east coast, in fact 4. Can't see the safe cable because it's thin, and thickness denotes capacity. Set 3 and safe are old, but up the west coast, WAX, on the east coast, Seacom and Easy, and there are more on the way. Now, if you look simply at this map, you'll see submarine cables running around the periphery, and we have an interesting phenomenon here. We have the kind of an inverted core. The edges are easy to reach, the middle parts are difficult to reach, and this has led my colleague Thuso Tusibera, Chief Executive Officer of the Ubuntu Net Alliance, to make the celebrated observation that we must not talk about landlocked countries. That's a pejorative term. We will talk about land-connected countries. So on the periphery, we have the sea-connected countries, and in the interior, we have land-connected countries. So lots of cable around the edges. In fact, lots of cable in the interior, more and more of it, driven by many factors, most prominent of which is probably the explosion of mobile technology across Africa. So lots of backhaul capacity for those purposes. So it's easier to get connected now than it was in the past. Now, let's talk about national research and education networks. I'm not going to talk much more about commercial aspects of connectivity. Let's talk about NRENs. NRENs are the building blocks of global research and education network connectivity. Typically, each country has one national research and education network, and there's good reasons for that. And that national research and education network provides connectivity to its member institutions, which are usually universities, research councils. Sometimes the remit extends a bit more broadly than that. And those NRENs deliver to their participating institutions benefits such as connectivity to other NRENs and to the global internet. So NRENs are our building blocks, thinking about how connectivity in this space works. South Africa's NREN is SANREN with a capital E, and there's a long story behind that capital E, which I won't relate here. Tenet is the operating partner in that collaboration with SANREN. This map is drawn from a fine publication called the Terrainer Compendium, which is issued annually. Terrainer is the Trans-European Research and Education Networking Association. They issue a very good resource each year showing a lot of information about European and other networks. Everything that is green on this map is a country with an NREN, with a National Research and Education Network. So you can see they're quite ubiquitous. You can also see lots of gaps in Africa. In fact, some of these gaps have been filled. We have an NREN in Mozambique that isn't shown. We have an NREN in Namibia that isn't shown. And they're growing elsewhere. But Africa is playing some degree of catch-up when it comes to this NREN space. It's not enough just to talk about where there are NRENs. We must also talk about how they are interconnected with one another. This map comes from GEONT, which is the Trans-European Research, the Pan-European Research Education Network, Regional Research Education Network. This is the world according to GEONT. This is as they see the connectivity picture. And you can see lots of circuits, including some from Africa terminating in Europe. This isn't to say that there aren't other NREN connections configured in other ways apart from these. But this is also the picture as we in the Ubuntu Alliance see it, and indeed in South Africa see it, because we have a peering connection into Giant, which also provides us with connectivity more generally to other regional research and education networks such as So, now's a critical question. How much bandwidth is enough? And we can talk about this one. We can probably hold a whole conference on this one in its own right. This is a useful benchmark picture. This is the European picture. What we've got across the bottom are different classes of institution, and the one we're interested in here is the one on the left, universities, schools and others appear elsewhere. And then these different colors denote different levels of connectivity. So the purple, deep purple, appropriate, is 10 gigabits per second data. And dark blue is gigabit per second data. So you can see more than half of universities and research councils, more than half of universities in giant countries are connected at gigabit speed. Worth observing that the academic enterprise is essentially a global enterprise. It's the same wherever you are. Yes, there are regional differences which are important, but the practice of scholarship is very much a global practice. And a scholar working in any given context will expect and will depend upon the same level of connectivity as his or her peers elsewhere. So this is quite a useful benchmark in thinking about how much bandwidth we should have. Okay, now I'm going to talk mostly about the Ubuntu Alliance because it's the part that I understand best. Let me say something quickly about the picture in West and Central Africa. There is a regional research and education network there. It's called WACREN. It doesn't have much actual connectivity running at the moment yet, and I can't tell you in detail what its connectivity looks like at the moment, but these are the member countries as of right now. And across the Mediterranean littoral, these parts of Africa, there is another networking picture. Those countries have been connected for a very long time, courtesy of a European Commission project. So the part that we're interested in, the part that I know best, is this eastern and southern part, which is the regional research and education network we know as the Ubuntu Alliance. Currently it aggregates 14 NRENs. Everything that is blue, deep blue, is an operating NREN in some form, and everything that is light blue is an NREN in establishment. So you can see in Southern Sudan, Angola, Botswana, Zimbabwe, these small countries in South Africa. And that I think is Burundi. We don't yet have a functioning NREN, but they're on the way. Elsewhere, to different degrees of sophistication, we have operational NRENs across this region, and the Ubuntu Alliance aggregates them and connects them to the rest of the world in ways that I'll show in a moment. So this is what the networking picture looks like right now. You'll see this term STM is used quite often. It's a technical term. It stands for synchronous transfer mode, but for the purpose of this discussion, you need to consider only that in STM1, which we use in various places, it's 155 megabits a second. In STM64, 10 gigabits a second. So TENET is connected directly into Amsterdam. This is on the CCOM cable, 10 gigabits a second. That's the South African Research Network. TENET in East Africa is doing quite well. That's the Kenyan Education Network. Connected at STM4 capacity, and better capacity is on the way. And in fact, the University of Nairobi has better international connectivity than the University of Cape Town. NREN's connected directly into points of presence in Africa. The Research and Education Network, RENU, the Research and Education Network with Uganda, connected into a point of presence in Kampala, to STM1's working capacity. ZAMREN, I beg your pardon, ZAMREN, the Zambian network, is connected through a single long cross-border connection that runs through Zimbabwe and into Johannesburg, and it's connected into TENET. We provide them with services at 300 megabits per second. We also have a high-capacity light path. This is a specialist connection from the Hot Spaceship Radio Astronomy Observatory outside of Victoria, running through to the joint the VLBI, Very Long Baseline Interferometry Aggregator in Netherlands, and that runs at 4 gigabits a second. Single large experiment running, global experiment running at 20 gigabits a second. And then we have pairing connections with the Giant network, which I spoke about earlier. That's very important for reaching the global research innovation network and connectivity to the London and Amsterdam Internet exchanges. Now, what has been very important in recent last year, also last 2 years, has been a European Commission project called Africa Connect, which aims to keep African traffic within Africa. Previously, if an African network is connected into the global research and education network, it typically connects in Europe. So if it's going to reach another African network, it typically has to go through Europe to get its traffic back. And the Africa Connect project aims to create cross-border connections within Africa. This is the kind of connections that are envisaged. If you look at the phase 1 connections, wet backbone up the east coast into East Africa, further connections on the way. I don't know how clear they are in that image, and eventually up the west coast as well. And there's quite a lot of capacity building work going on in collaboration with quite a number of partners, including the Network Startup Resource Center based in the US, and the International Network for the Availability of Scientific Professionals. So I think I'll stop there. If you want to contact me about any of this, that's my email address, and I'll take questions.
For sharing those difficult work at the back end of how to get everything connected. Looks easy on the PowerPoint, but I think going into those discussions with the various structures in the various countries, that are big challenges, especially talking to the governments and the universities in those countries as well. I think most of us wants to move into making ourselves present in Africa. And yes, I think from South Africa and from Stellenbosch University, very keen to interact with many of our African universities, and we've got many projects, as you can see, Open Africa and Open International. And yes, I think together with yourself, together with the Googles, together with the Microsofts, I think we've got the same passion and the same drive. I think successfully we can share knowledge all over Africa. Okay, can I have some questions, please? Okay.
Yeah, already have the microphone. Thank you for your presentation. We already heard from Google and Microsoft, our friends and partners, presenting themselves basically as charities today, which they're not. I was just wondering, in your experience, so how helpful are they going to be when they deliver internet to Chad or Southern Sudan, DRC? So how keen are they when it comes to tough questions? I mean, we have seen those cables around Africa now a couple of times. So how is it going with the other parts of Africa? Where do you see, drones, the balloons, and all these initiatives going?
Excuse me.
That's yours, eh?
Left my crystal ball at home, I'm sorry. That's an extremely difficult question to answer. A major part of the Ubuntu Net Alliance's strategic plan for the next 5 years is to foster the increased development of NRENs across its target region, and to collaborate with WAC, West Africa, West and Central Africa Research and Innovation Network in the augmentation of capacity in that region. It's not easy to. Why do we not have an NREN functioning in Zimbabwe right now? Why do we not have an NREN functioning in Botswana right now? Why has it been so slow in places like Angola? And what about the DRC? Each country has its own specificities. It's a combination of historical interaction among universities there, often peculiar patterns of dominance and conflict between different universities, its own regulatory regime, complex pattern of relationships between incumbent operators and the state ownership in telcos, foreign ownership in telcos, strategic plan for economic development. So there's no single formula that we can grab and we can apply. I think that a lot of opportunity arises simply out of the fact that mobile operators are driving so much capacity across. There's another driver of capacity that's worth mentioning. That's power line companies. As the cost of power rises, so the demand for power has to be met in new kinds of ways, and a lot of that comes from opening up and developing new hydroelectric resources in Africa. So that we're expecting to get capacity from the DRC, now, as those power companies build power across Africa, so they carry optical fiber those islands as well. They start out doing it just so that they can monitor their network, but in time it becomes national resource of really significance. Lots of advantages to it as well. It doesn't get stolen, for example. Or, in fact, put that a bit differently, the attempts to steal it usually fail. So, it's not much of an answer. I suppose my answer is empirical and circumstantial. There's no immediately obvious route.
Thank you, Duncan, for that. Any more questions?
I've just got a question. It's actually related to the schools, specifically K-12, and what mandate does Tenet have from Department of Basic Education or the provincial departments of education to connect the schools? Because that's obviously one of the big challenges at the moment.
We have no mandate. Our mandate is from our owners. Tenet is owned by 23 public universities and 4 statutory research councils, and the mandate we have from them is to deliver connectivity to them. The network that we operate was mostly not built by us. It was mostly built by the Department of Science and Technology, and we partner with the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research network, and we expect to do so for some time to come. There are a lot of questions being asked about whether that SANREN network can be used for schools, further educational training institutions, even more broadly than that, hospitals, museums, other community entities of that kind. And answering those questions in the years ahead is going to be quite a complex and interesting challenge. Tenet will always be a university and research network. That's our mandate, and if we start doing anything other than that, then our institutions will quite rightly tell us to stop. This will mean that we lost our focus. Nevertheless, we will assist where we have the capacity to do so in efforts to extend that network appropriately, provided that it doesn't compromise what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Duncan, for that answer. And I must say that's the formal answer. There's also the informal relationship between, as Duncan mentioned, between universities and Tenet, and where the university takes the responsibility of the distribution of the connectivity to the schools in that area. Duncan does allow it. The prerequisite is still that we are accountable and responsible for the information.
Thank you, Harmy, for that affirmation. There is a conversation going on between the Department of Basic Education and, well, I can't actually say Department of Science and Technology, but certainly between DBE and my colleagues in the CSIR, Standard Accountancy area. That's a big project. It's 26, 27 schools. The New Zealand case is an interesting one, and I often point to it as an example of what we might do. In that case, the National Research and Education Network, which is PARN, Kiwi Academic Research and Education Network, I think, It is operated by a company called RIANS, Research and Education. I can't remember the rest of it. They were given the mandate. RIANS is a crown company. It's owned by the New Zealand state. They were given the mandate to connect the schools. To do that, they spun off a separate entity, National Education Network, wholly owned by RIANS itself, if I'm remembering correctly. And that National Education Network was given the mandate of connecting schools. To date, I believe it has connected 10% schools, maybe more. Particularly when we come to connecting rural schools, there are enormous challenges. Incidentally, I think that the real promise of TV Whitespace is not in reaching rural schools. The real promise is in urban connectivity. It's not good at long distance stuff by its very nature. What it is really good at is going through obstacles, like buildings, even parts of small hills sometimes. Delivery in urban areas is really good.
Thank you, Duncan. Then it's my pleasure to invite you for lunch, and not only for lunch, but also the opportunity to do some networking. And then at 13:30, we will change the style of the presentations. This is where the technology challenges comes in. This is when we're going to bring in remotely some of our universities in Sweden, universities in Botswana, and obviously this is going to be interesting, but it's all connected based on connectivity, Duncan, and thanks for providing that connectivity, and thank you for your presentation. Again, we can